we're going to get into a sit-down chat. So please help me welcome a great leader and a great person, Mr. Al Guido.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Cool. Before we get going with our main topic about how you lead in a chaotic environment, can you share a little bit about your background and your philosophy and approach to leadership?
Sure. So I grew up in New Jersey, go figure. My last name's Guido. You grew up in New Jersey. I am a son of a truck driver and of a mother was an administrator. I went to a small school none of you have ever heard of called the College of New Jersey. I got out. I worked in the financial sector for long enough to pass all my certifications, not long enough to actually sell anything after passing my certifications. I sold tickets out of the basement of the Philadelphia Spectrum. Fast forward 20 plus years, I've really been involved in sports all on the way. Worked in every single professional league that there is. And as I mentioned, I was with 2 agencies, 1 Legends, and now starting my own. I guess philosophy on leadership is frankly, hire much smarter people than me and let them do their job. And I've been fortunate to work with amazing people along the way, whether it was my time at the Dallas Cowboys or whether it was my time here at the 49ers and then leading a global agency. You know, I think you quickly realize that, I know we're going to talk a lot about AI, but I think you quickly realize that the world is changing dramatically overnight. And so what I see, honestly, at home with my daughters who are 15, 13, and 11 is very, very different than the world that I grew up. And truthfully, I think we've all probably heard these stories, whether they were our parents or grandparents or even us at times, is sort of hearkening back or maybe hating what's currently happening and not embracing it. And for me, I embrace it. Like, I don't care that my daughters play Roblox and watch other people playing Roblox at the same time. I try to lean into all of these things. I think as it relates to, we all know the law of the diffusion of innovation, which is like, I am an early adopter of all things. And maybe that's my age. I still think I'm young enough to be that, but I truly believe that's where you should be in this world, because that is where the consumer is. And if you run an organization like ours, there's no question that you have to meet every consumer where they're at. But if you're thinking about the long tail, that is our youth, and they are consuming our content in very different ways than we are today. So there you go.
Awesome. Thank you. So we all know with regards to the NFL, it's a chaotic, fast-paced environment. But as a leader, you have to know when to take risks and when to be a little bit more conservative. And when you're dealing with a lot of the unpredictable, how do you approach risk management, risk aversion, and how aggressive how do you approach that aspect of your business?
Yeah, so in the National Football League, first of all, turn off Google Alerts. You quickly realize, and I've gone through this, I wasn't very good at this early in my career. You can search your name up, and the reality of there's good and bad, right, of having a brand that is so visible that everybody wants to comment on every social media platform. And literally, if you lose a game, you can consume all of that content, and it could really distract you from what you're ultimately trying to achieve. And it took me a good 5 years to really recognize that, and I did not deal with chaos well. Now, I will just tell you, I ignore it or embrace it. It's just part of what makes our sport great. And of course, in the National Football League, we're on a good run right now. We didn't finish it off last year. Hopefully we can do that this year. But winning and losing is not a strategy. It's like market conditions, to be honest with you. And so certainly there's no doubt it's the outcome of what happens in our planning. But our league is set up so much so that eventually you will lose. Unlike the English Premier League, where you get relegated, in American sports, when you're not good, they give you more draft picks, right? You probably have salary cap to sign players. And so eventually the world kind of comes around, and you need to know that. And so at the 49ers, we think about things in cycles. And, a lot has been reported on because of our quarterback and because of the system in which we play in, that we have a capped system from a salary cap perspective, and our quarterback is still on a rookie deal. So yes, that is advantageous to us as it relates to how we frame up where we spend our dollars, which does give us an advantage. But there's no, we have to be planning for next year, the year after that, the year after that, or you can find yourself in a cycle of a complete downturn that lasts a number of years. And so our organization tries to be at the forefront of where we think the league is headed. On the business side, we have a say in this matter because the way the National Football League works is effectively 48.5% of all revenue, or AR in that case, is shared by the players. And so the more that we grow the pie, both at the team level and at the national level, the more opportunity we have to spend on those players. And so I think of it as just this good flywheel that we have to keep up. And, if you're good enough over a period of time, we've been in Levi Stadium for 10 years. Not a lot of people remember those first 4. I do. They were tough. And it's just going to happen in sports. Like the Warriors, look, greatest run, arguably, of all NBA outside of maybe the Chicago Bulls, and we'll see what happens. It's really hard to keep these things going, which is why I say a strategy should not be wins and losses. A strategy should be an actual business and on-field strategy that then replies or deals with market conditions when they happen.
Awesome. And so shifting gears a little bit to kind of an analogy with our clients, your fans. Fans change over time based on a lot of different things, obviously, just like our clients do. So how do you adjust and make sure that there's engagement that evolves appropriately and efficiently?
Well, you have to meet every fan where they are. And of course, as we look at our marketing dollars and where we spend, there's, for us, we're lucky or fortunate to know that every single Sunday, 70,000 people are going to be in the building. And so it's almost like real estate to some degree. It's like there will be people in the building. The question is not how many, it's at what price points. And what the demographics and the makeup of those individuals are. And so with our organization, we're thinking a lot about, we have the luxury of thinking a lot about the future of our fan. And that starts from every single marketing channel, whether it's the sophistication of our social and digital, whether it's our content creation, whether it's frankly our investments in flag football and knowing that we're now the only team in the Bay Area now that the Raiders left and went to Las Vegas, and what that might mean for our daughters, whether it's getting behind a bill that got passed last year to make flag football an interscholastic sport for women. You should start thinking about the long tail of our consumer, and even said differently, or in a way in which we think about our business is, you could easily think about it as a 70,000 people in our venue on game day, but truly that's only 700,000 people a year. There are 15 million 49ers football fans. And so constantly thinking about ways in which we engage and monetize with those fans. And the good news is the world is shrinking. I don't need to tell anybody in here that. You can consume content wherever you're at, whether it's you're into the Euros right now or you're into Copa America, you're into baseball. It's pretty awesome to be able to show up in a town, open up an app, consume content, buy a ticket, do all of those things. And how we're building our organization needs to be thought of in the future. And I know that this is AI, and there's so many ways in which it impacts our world, whether it's customer service, whether it's creative, whether it's content, whether it's pricing and algorithms that go into how we run our business. Frankly, it's all being disrupted in a good way. And I think for the 49ers, if our goal is, and I think I'll be careful here on social, but I think there's a team that calls themselves America's team. And I think from we want to win as many as Lombardi trophies as humanly possible. But we want to engage and make our community proud of us at the same time. And I think what you're seeing now, the 49ers, whether it's Christian on the cover of Madden or 5 players in the top 10 jersey sales, is we have a really engaging brand and team. And it's our opportunity to strike. And my hope is that whatever this run is, as long as you're a 49ers fan, you agree with me that we will have taken over that top spot when that time comes.
I sure hope so. You said team. So getting a little bit more specific here, without teamwork, there really is no success, no opportunity for success. So when something creates a wedge, something new or somebody, how do you approach that? And in your world with professional athletes and the egos involved, frankly, and the highly successful athletes, the most successful athletes that you deal with, how do you get alignment in situations where there's disruption?
I think, as we focus in on drafting players or bringing players into our ecosystem, one, you have to believe, no different than any company, that the culture itself that you're bringing people into is strong, that leadership is aligned, and that everyone knows what's important. We use a lot of acronyms in sports. Win, what's important now. And so the people that we bring in have to make up certain characteristics, and players do. And oftentimes, there's just great by two in the military around like high achievers, but low trust and loyalty and all of those things. And so, in the NFL, the margin of victory is so small, and every player is fast and big and all of those things. So the question is unlike college athletics or high school, where you might be able to get away with a little bit more athleticism than the next person because you're just so much better. In the NFL, that's not the case. And it really does come down to what's in here and what kind of people that you're drafting in our regard into the organization. So we focused in on a lot of character. And when you do that, the good news is that leadership happens at all levels. It's not defined by title. Or on a team, it's not defined by just who the captains are. And at the team level, the great part, I talked to John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan about this a lot, is there is no more policing from our head coach and general manager. You know why? The players police each other. Because there is a standard that has been set at our organization around how you act, how you go about your work, how you take care of your body. And that is the same on the business side. There is a standard in which we operate. We push the boundaries. We always do. We're not afraid to fail or put ourselves out there. And sure, it's easy to say that when you're the 49ers, maybe versus a different brand, but I really don't think it is. I think every organization needs to have whatever standard that you set for whatever people that you bring in and the culture in which you build on a daily basis. And to me, at times, culture is what you celebrate and what you tolerate. We certainly celebrate our wins and losses. At times we learn from them, but we don't tolerate bad behavior. We don't tolerate bad ethics. We don't tolerate poor work ethic. Those are things we will not tolerate. And if you don't do those things, I think you'll find a standard that, look, you're going to deal with injuries and all the things that happen. We all have this in business, no matter what. But I think as long as you keep your head down that path and you hire the right people and you build good culture, generally speaking, on average, you'll win day in and day out.
Awesome. So now back lens up a little bit to the NFL. And the NFL is obviously incredibly profitable, the most profitable entertainment business in the States. And obviously they are trying to expand that around the world. Can you give us a little bit of a peek inside that world and maybe share some light on things that we may not be aware of, or just some insight that you have into that world?
Well, I always think it starts with the hero feature, which is the product on the field. Because without that, none of the other things matter. And the product on the field is strong. And, my dad, who loves football, and he's probably, one of those, doesn't like all the rule changes that have happened, but it has made the sport safer. It's made the sport more entertaining. I don't think we've ever seen a league where there's more parity. 50% of the clubs who make the playoffs did not make it the year before, which means that when you wake up on July or August when training camp begins, you truly do believe your team has a chance to win. And I think that's different than some of the other sports. And He said, unless you're Washington. Although, I really like Jaden Daniels, but I hear. So, the structure of the league itself is set up for success in the sense that small market teams can compete with big market teams on a fair playing field. I was actually trying to explain this to my daughter the other day when she was asking me a lot of questions about Brandon Ayuk. And I was like, it's not so simple, sweetheart. I don't know how to tell you this. It's like if you go into a grocery store and I only give you $100, but you put $110 of food in the basket, you got to give $10 back. So something you got to that's the way our world works, right? We had a lot of fun with Kyle where we drew 22 spots on a roster, 11 on offense, 11 on defense. I know there's more people on an NFL team, but just bear with me for a second. And we just said allocate $100. So we had a really hard time doing it. But that's exactly the way our world works, right? We have a certain amount of money. Every team can spend that money. And so it does really get down to how you value, who you draft, what your analytics are on those players. But the league is strong because of the hero feature, and then you would arguably say because of the media deals. Our world is very different. We have probably more tailwinds than headwinds in the National Football League. And the reason for that is we pull all of our content together at the national level and we sell it to broadcasters, where in most other leagues in North America, outside of Major League Soccer now through its deal with Apple, they have sort of two different structures. They have a national structure, so if you think about the NBA, whether it be ESPN or TNT, but then there's the local structure. And for those of you who are Warriors fans, you know that through watching Comcast Bay Area. Those regional sports networks are under significant pressure as it relates to what we all know of the unbundle or bundle or cord cutters. In the National Football League, we don't have that. And you would call it lack of supply, makes it such that, every game matters and our markets are great from a media perspective. So when you combine a great collective bargaining agreement with media deals, strong demand on strong sort of competition on the field, buildings that are full, you have a really strong league. Now, the next growth pattern for us is a couple different things. I think international is a strong growth area for the National Football League. We're definitely dominant in North America, but we are not around the rest of the world. And we have a lot to learn from the Formula Ones and the Premier Leagues and other people that take their content and put it overseas. I think for a while the NFL just had an event strategy, to be honest. We put games over in London, we put them in Germany, and that was kind of it. That's not a long-term strategy. It's fine, it's good, it sells out. But I think now, as we expand the schedule and we start to think about playing games internationally, that's how we get there. The other way to get there, which I'm glad that the NFL, I wouldn't call it a pivot, but we have to be honest that the world's global football game will probably be number one for a long period of time. There's just a lot of history in that. But the Olympics are a really interesting point in 2028, and I give Casey Wasserman and team credit and the NFL to make flag football an Olympic sport. I think that will open up a massive window to a number of people and countries that will ultimately play some version of football, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? You think about cricket has multiple different versions. Rugby has multiple different versions. If you play soccer, you start at 7v7, then 9v9, then 11v11. So I think having another outlet that is football will only make more football fans. And I think the women piece is super important, and obviously I'm biased to it. But I've just seen through my daughters how much playing flag has made them bigger fans of tackle football. And I think that's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, that's a big thing for sure. Circling back and kind of riff here for a minute, but on Brandon Ayuk. So Brandon Ayuk, for those of you that don't know, he's a star receiver for the Niners. He's in the fourth year of his rookie contract, and he wants money. So my point on bringing that up isn't to put you on the spot, because I know you're going to pay him. But my question is bigger because on a much smaller scale in our worlds, there's a lot of times where we face the same thing. Somebody who's incredibly valuable, but at what point do you have to part ways and just stick to the salary cap, or also be considerate of what's, like for you guys, it's on TV and it's on social media, but it will get out when you raise the bar too much and overpay somebody and everybody knows about it. you've now created a bigger problem. And you want to pay good people, but there is a point where you have to have some sort of basis for justification.
Yeah, it's hard. He's a heck of a talent, and not speaking specifically just about him, but there is parts of corporate America and maybe even other leagues that I'm envious of. Right? And the reality is, I wish we could play all of our players exactly what they deserve. That's not our league. It's not the way it works. You have to make difficult decisions around talent. And Trey, you're right. I'm sure we all have to do that in our daily lives at the environment we work in. My job, my CEO of Elevate, I don't technically have to make those decisions. The question is like whether or not what market rate is for that employee, and whether or not I believe in our growth as a company to take a bet. Because there are no salary cap or rules around that. So I'm sort of envious of that world when I think about the National Football League. But juxtapose that with the league wouldn't be as strong if not for that structure. So you sort of just have to deal with these things as they come. And I think for us, saying goodbye to good players is never easy. And there's, Bill Walsh used to talk about saying goodbye a year too early versus a year too late. It's really hard to do. And, there's a team that's right down the street here that's dealing with Klay Thompson, who's, in my mind, one of the world-class players, and terrible bad breaks with injuries that have to make a difficult decision around somebody that means so much to this community. We had to do it with Eric Armstead, multiple-time Walter Payton of the Man of the Year award. And, you make these changes, you try, as you think about your org structure and design. I mean, how many times have we all heard make decisions without names and faces in those blocks, and try to build it for as best in the right way as you think going into the future. You can do that as much as possible, but at some point you got to revert back to the names and faces, because it's not a perfect science. It's why it's an art and a science. And so Brandon, look, my hope is he's a 49er for a long time. Those negotiations will go on, but he's not alone in that. And this is why, back to the culture question, it's even harder, because when you pay bad people, that's when other people start to complain, right? I always think that it's really interesting when you either promote someone or give somebody a raise, if not just their quote unquote vertical cheers, if they work in a certain division, but everybody across the company cheers and celebrates. That's when you've done something right for someone. And we got a lot of those guys. There's nobody in our locker room that's like, I can't believe they paid them, so now I want mine. It's like everybody deserves theirs. That's the challenge of having a team full of all pros, is frankly, they all deserve it, Brandon being one of them. But this is an area where I would say I'm envious of a world in which Elevate lives in, which is I get to pay people as much as they deserve as long as I'm willing to do it.
Yeah, it's definitely subjective. And when, it's sort of, it's always an emotion. It's always a personal connection. In our business with your Elevate, same thing. It's all about people. And, it's not how many widgets you make in a day. It's more about who you are and your character and what you bring to the team.
Yeah, but the other thing I'd say though is like, you do have to be willing to let people go on to better opportunities if you don't provide one for them. And I think that gets around, right? I know. Sometimes how you let people go, meaning like if they have another opportunity, is as important as, getting people to stay. And so I think about the football tree that Bill Walsh was, and all the coaches that coached for Coach Walsh and then went on to other teams, or now with Kyle Shanahan. I think Kyle has, I don't even know how many head coaches that have coached underneath him, whether it's Sean McVay, Mike McDaniel, the Packers coach, the Jets coach. I mean, you talk like there's probably 5 or 6 teams that now have coaches that coach for Kyle. And then you have players who've played here that are now playing somewhere else that speak highly about the organization. And so for us, this is a world where I'm glad to see a bunch of traffic back in the city. But there's a world where we do have a disadvantage at the 49ers, potentially, it depends on how you look at it. In the sense of, now that I told you we can only pay people so much, just imagine if us and take a state with no income tax, Texas is trying to pay the same player. We are at a financial disadvantage in that deal. And so at that point, that player needs to make a decision around, depending upon where they're at in their career, who sets them up for the most success, both current and future. Now, we lean into the future because we've seen legends play for this team, and frankly, what they've been able to do post-career is sometimes bigger than what they did during their career. And we lean into the fact that we believe we have a competitive team and a great coach and a great GM, and that winning will eventually get you paid as much as humanly possible and make up for that delta. But that is a real thing in our world. And when people leave, what they say about the organization resonates, whether for us on the business side. I have a lot of mementos in my office. It's really cool. My favorite one is a ball, like a game ball, with every single person that's worked for me or this organization that's now in a C title role at some other league or team. That is one of the coolest things I have. And so for all of us, we want to keep everybody, but it's not possible. Treatment on the way out is equally as important as treatment on the way in.
Amazing. Fantastic. Levi Stadium, 49ers home, I think next month is 10 years. I can't believe it. But what has changed in those 10 years, and what do you see in the coming 10 years?
A lot has changed in 10 years. The infrastructure of the building hasn't changed, but like a home, when we first opened it up, we had a lot of challenges, operational challenges, on-field challenges. Talk about chaos. There was planes flying over, telling the ownership team to sell the team at the time. And so, we've hosted a number of events, Super Bowl 50, the College Football Playoff. I know my daughter's favorites of Taylor Swift, although that was tough in the Travis Kelce thing for me. There was 2 weeks of no Taylor in my house before the Super Bowl. But I would say that these buildings, from a business perspective, have become 365-day entertainment venues. They have to be. You can't have a $1 billion facility only operate for 10 days out of the year. What it's meant to our community is even more important. We've hosted more events in the first 10 years than any other venue in the United States, and that's without a dome, which is not easy because you take basketball and other things out of it that other venues might be able to host. We've done $2 billion of economic impact. We drove 12,000 jobs over the first 10 years. And I would say a lot of the customer experience hasn't necessarily changed from our physical plant, but how we go about servicing those customers dramatically changed over that time frame. And a way in which people interact in stadium is very different than they once did, where they were downloading content, now they're uploading content in a dramatic way. So how you build and design a building for the future of what a fan experience might look like. The next 10 years, to me, are equally as important. And we have, I think this really speaks to, the folks who, I guess, raise your hand if you live in the Bay, because this will resonate. If not, it's okay. Not many. All right. But to me, we were aggressive, and we went after Super Bowl 60 and the World Cup. I believe in my lifetime, we will be the only region and venue that will ever host a Super Bowl and a World Cup in the same year. And that takes an enormous amount of support from everybody along the way. And we are making hundreds of millions of dollars of investment into that building just 10 years in. Because no different than a product or a widget or a service, the truth of the matter is in a couple years it's probably outdated and you need to keep reinvesting in it. And so for us, we're not resting on our laurels during this time where we could easily say we have a great football team, let's just roll out the red carpet, people will show up. If in 10 years, all we've really done is hosted a bunch of football games and won a bunch of football games and hopefully put a bunch of Lombardi trophies in the case, that's actually not enough, at least not for us, not the way our organization is built. It's what have we given back to the community? How much have we grown, hopefully, the empire of the San Francisco 49ers and the Oval? And so we're focused in on a lot of those things, both in this region and outside of this region, because like I said, there is no reason for us, in my mind, or any of our organization to cede anything to anyone. I'm sure we all listen to podcasts. I spent 3 hours listening to the Acquired podcast on the National Football League, and it's really fascinating. Our parents and grandparents will remember a time when baseball was called the American pastime. I would argue it's not anymore. And there's reason for that. And if you listen to the podcast, some of the reason is because they did not lean into television when it became a massive factor, because they were so afraid it was going to drive people away from their ballparks. And so I don't know what the next 10 years is. I just know that none of us have the opportunity to sit on our hands and watch the world go by. And we sit in a region that's not going to let that happen either. So we might as well lean into it. And then my hope in 10 years, to answer your question on people, is that we've created such an amazing organization that's doing things both on the football side, on the business side, that nobody wants to leave. That's the hope.
Thank you. So switching a little bit to Elevate, and you guys have, it's only been 5 years. You've already won Sports Business Journal's Agency of the Year. You guys are basically on fire. It's more similar to our world as ad agencies than the 49ers. So we touched on this a little bit in terms of retention, but on a more micro level, how do you, or can you share some insight on how you reward and motivate your employees in that environment, which is very similar to ours?
Of course, there's the financial motivation of working at an agency. You know, in the NFL, you're not a public company. You can't give out equity, and so you're stuck with your traditional forms of compensation, whether it be salary and commissions and bonuses, et cetera. In my world at Elevate, I can change that dynamic, right? I can get everybody aligned, or even though you're not a public company, you can be equity. You can get everybody aligned around a common cause, which is sort of to grow, elevate in all shapes and sizes. We motivate people across verticals. Some people call them divisions. Some people call them products. It depends on what you do. And so whether you're in our creative division, or whether you're in our tickets division, or whether you're in our partnerships, everybody is compensated across the growth of the company at all levels. And honestly, some of it is just what I love about the agency space versus, and why I love both of my hats, is what I love about the agency space is the mental stimulation you get by working on behalf of, and you all get this, on different types of brands and properties, because not one is the same. They all have different goals and objectives. And so I think with that becomes an element of continued learning that may or may not happen at a sports team at times, because you can get sort of stuck in your DMA, right? Like if you think about it, using the NFL and Elevate, the 49ers can only sell 70,000 seats. We don't make any more. Elevate can sell millions and millions and millions and millions of seats. It just depends on how big we grow our company and what properties we serve. And so the TAM is kind of endless. And I think, you know, we spent a lot of time at Elevate around what we saw as the future of sports entertainment, and frankly, how brands intersect within that future of sports entertainment. And we talk a lot about the power of live. You know, if you think about the world in which we consume today, there's not many things that our children or our consumers are consuming live outside of sports entertainment. That's why you've seen the Apples come into the market. You've seen the Amazons come into the market. You've seen Google come into the market. You've now seen Netflix come into the market to buy sports properties. you've seen every single league adopt some form of jersey entitlement or media impression that they didn't have before. And so what you're finding is that, in my mind, COVID didn't change anything. It just accelerated everything. And brands that, and sports teams needed to evolve with the changing times. And at an agency that is, a full service agency around what I would call the commercial stack of a team or a brand, the opportunities are endless. And so whether it's learning, whether it's compensation, whether it's growth of the enterprise to work on different things, that's how we try to keep people motivated inside the agency.
Awesome. Thank you. It's interesting and so similar. So our reason for being here in this conference is really AI, and to discuss all of that, and leadership is certainly a part of that. And it's specific to our industry. And there's a lot of disruption within our agencies and a lot of different emotions, from excitement to concern to confusion, and sometimes all at the same time. So what are you seeing, and how are you approaching that within both of your companies and trying to manage that? It's a real emotional time right now for everyone.
Yeah, the good news is I think for sports right now, it's only been additive. It hasn't necessarily yet, I guess, replaced certain job functions, right? And the truth of the matter is, it's been here for a while. We just talk little bit about it more, given the world in which we exist in. But if you think about how we might, the data and analytics around players and how that might be changed through through AI. If you think about our creative divisions and content divisions, and you could think about removing people from that, or you can just think about getting really good at the tools, and so that you're getting faster with everything that you're doing, and your analyses are getting better. And so at Elevate's probably the better example of this than the team side. We move hundreds of millions of dollars in ticket inventory. And, whether you traveled to come here, you used either your company or you used Kayak or you used whatever. We used to do this through humans. We would price ticket inventory on open platforms. And you could think about Ticketmaster, SeatGeek, or others. We're now no longer using humans to do that. There's no reason to, right? We have our own proprietary tools at Elevate that both distribute and price inventory in seconds everywhere, based off multiple different factors, not just consumer demand factors, but frankly, hundreds of different factors, whether that's, what oil might cost in that market versus, interest rates per se. Like, there's tons of different factors that go in, share of wallet into each individual market. So that is an area where it's being disrupted immediately. And the information that we're giving back to those teams, we used to, we have a division called Insights, which was frankly our version of, not to pick on any good or bad, our Bain or McKinsey of sports, and it was done with a lot of humans. The truth of the matter is, those insights are really been driven by our AI tools. You're just dumping raw data feeds of millions and millions of ticket inventory, and you're providing teams with 5 insights or 10 insights based off what they're seeing in market within seconds. Our creative division, whether it's on behalf of brands or whether it's on behalf of properties, is dramatically improved by AI. We do a lot of experiential design. We built the experiential center for the Tennessee Titans. We're building one for Cisco now. And frankly, we're using all AI sketches to start, and then overlaying that with our own creative division. And so just the speed in which we're willing to, that we can operate now, is vastly different. And then, how we think about our consumer insights platform, which we call Epic, Elevate Performance and Insights Cloud. It's our own proprietary tools that we're now providing to brands around what consumer insights we're seeing in the marketplace. And truthfully, a lot of that's just open API integration in the world that we already get insight to. But so for me, it hasn't yet kind of disrupted the labor force. I would say it's enhanced the labor force. And we're trying our damnedest to be super smart about it. So we have an entire education stream going on at Elevate right now where our chief technology officer every week, whether internally or externally, leads a panel on the use of AI and the companies that are doing work on behalf of it. Because I think in any organization, I think about the levels of education, right? And so you would assume the higher you get, your master's or your business degree across every single discipline in your company. I'm trying to accelerate that learning curve. And so for every entry level employee at Elevate, you are going through a master class because I am trying to get you to middle school, high school, college, and master's as quick as possible, regardless of where you sit in our ecosystem. And, Jensen Wan said something the other day on this podcast. It's like that I thought was really fascinating, which is like you're just trying to build enough products, have the right strategy, hire the right people, so that when the apple falls from the tree, you're the first to pick it up or catch it. So I don't necessarily always know where we're headed. I just know that we're trying to build the right tools on behalf of our properties and brands that they will use now and hopefully into the future, and build things that they ultimately won't build on their own because they don't have any reason to, but an agency does. We have the scale to be able to do it.
Awesome. Yeah, the first to the apple, I've got to change my philosophy, which was when the boat leaves, I don't want to be the last one on the dock.
There you go.
So I think the first one to the apple is much better. Thank you, Al. This has been great. I want to just open it up and see if anybody has any questions. We can do that now. Yep, Tricia.
So coming to you from Buffalo, New York, where we are building a new stadium, and you talked about share of revenue, and you have a small market like Buffalo, you've got a big market here like San Francisco. The impact of PSLs on these smaller markets, and when you want to build new stadiums that don't have domes and can't be housed for so long. I mean, what role do PSLs have in the future?
Massive role. So I think everybody can hear the question, but it's around what's called personal seat licenses. And so, quick history lesson: personal seat licenses are just a different form, minus the donation part or the tax write-off part. If you've gone to a university and you've bought tickets, ultimately, if you buy on the 50-yard line for the Texas Longhorns, you have to give a donation on top of your ticket price. And so that's been going on forever. But in 1995, when the Carolina Panthers came into the National Football League, they sold something called personal seat licenses, which if you own a golf membership, it's very similar. They have been a massive tool for NFL teams as it relates to paying off debt for buildings. They are not considered all revenue that gets shared with the players. So the 49ers did around $600 million of personal seat license sale. I think the Buffalo Bills are embarking on somewhere over a little over $200 million for the marketplace. But they truly are a financing mechanism for these teams. And so if you think about both the private sector and the public sector of investing, it's very controversial. I know there's a lot of public money going into the Bills stadium, which probably reduces the load that the team might have. Some of that is because of market sizing. It's important for that franchise because I think that there's areas in which you can invest in the teams that aren't capped. And that's your coaching staff, that's your support structure, that's everything that goes in and around that. And you heard me say, I'll talk about the Dallas versus Niners example. Of course, players are going to look at their salary, but they're going to look at all the other things that you do to help them be a great athlete. And so I think from a Bills perspective, with Josh Allen and everything they got going, it's important to the NFL that the Buffalo market outkicks its coverage. And I think a new stadium will help it do that. And the NFL is one of those markets where it doesn't follow standard logic, where you have the Green Bay Packers or the Pittsburgh Steelers or now the Buffalo Bills or even the Kansas City Chiefs. They're kind of at the higher end of the food chain as it relates to revenue, yet they're in some of the smallest markets. And that speaks to outsized fandom. And I think that it's like anything else. When we talk about investments now, whether Elevate or the Niners, we look for outsized fandom. because if you have that, whether it's a consumer product or a service, eventually you have a business to be built off of. And I think the Bills right now have outsized fandom that will hopefully drive it. But it is a controversial thing in markets. The one thing I would just tell people is that if you believe that there should be fewer public dollars into the private sector, and the private sector should live on its own, then to some degree, these types of mechanisms help from that perspective, fund these programs. Go Bills. Yeah. Good luck to you.
John.
I'm interested in the proliferation of legalized gambling, gaming. Has that been a good thing for the NFL because it gets more people interested in the games, or has it made it more transactional that people are looking at it just as a wager and not as something, the fandom aspect of it?
I think overall it's been a good thing. I think there are some things need to be watched, you look out for, and we're seeing that now, and some of our players and coaches have been suspended, and so there are certainly concerns around competitive balance, or maybe not just balance, but just competition in general. It's probably not as big of a deal in the NFL because you're not in a single entity sport like golf or tennis, where there could be some concerns around throwing matches and all of those other things that come along with it. But in general, it's been a very good thing. And I would say it started even before legalized sports betting. It was really fantasy football. If you think about what fantasy football did to the National Football League as it relates to making casual fans into fans, because it was so easy to be consumed in it. What it has changed dramatically, and maybe not so much legalized sports betting, what we've seen that's been super different than when I grew up is when I was growing up, there was this tribalism around your host city's team. What you're seeing now is there's probably two things that are happening. Like my daughters are fans of individual players who've created super big brands and also teams themselves. Where before, like where I grew up, I wouldn't even think about being a fan of another player of another team. Like it was like I was like, no, why would I care about them? But I think, knowing where to call it the helmet off time frame, it's been a big deal. On the monetary side, it's massive. And we will see every single state in the U.S. have legalized sports betting. You just can't give up that tax revenue. It's just not going to happen. I know here a bill failed miserably in California, but it will eventually just be legislated in, and that's what we'll see. And from there, the question will be is how many players are out there? What type of deal structures those entities live under, right? New York has something going on right now where the tax system makes it very difficult for these legalized sports betting properties to even make money. And so I think legislation will eventually evolve. Teams will continue to sell it, and the real risk will be on the player perspective moving forward.
This is Chad Brenda. I'm from the Baltimore area right now. And sadly, not a Baltimore fan. I'm the Washington fan. Get that out of the way. But I have a question. So you mentioned, and it's not any new information, but surrounding yourself and the organization with better people and resources. How do you go about doing that when, I guess, kind of at the start, your financial resources are limited? It's like building a team and you don't have this huge salary cap. Like, what are things that you go through procedurally, and how do you break that down?
Well, I think it's important to define every team has a different value set based off, frankly, probably the structure of your organization, right? And so whether it's the Baltimore Ravens, because you have Lamar Jackson, you may play a certain style. So that style may make you value a certain position different than we value a position based off style of play. And so I think the great coaches in this league are able to be adaptive to multiple different styles at times. And so for us, we value certain positions in the way that we value them. It might not be the same for every team. And then there's just the reality that you have to draft well in the National Football League. It's like you have to. Because of the way the rookie wage scale works, there is a structure in which we are going to have the CMCs of the world. We're going to have the Nick Bosas of the world, the Fred Warners of the world. So once you have that level of high-end talent, it's really hard, I guess, if you were to say from a class perspective, is like if anybody got maybe hurt in the CBA, it might have been the middle class, right? So the rookies, because they have a rookie wage scale and it's already baked in, and then you have your super vets who are your primetime players. Filling in the value, guys, is really scouting and analytics. And I would say, like, if you look at really, really good organizations, take a look at how many people they hit on that are outside of like the first or second round, right? And if you think about the 49ers, whether it's a George Kittle as a fifth rounder or a Fred Warner as a third rounder, you have to draft exceptionally well to be consistently good in the National Football League. Because if all you're trying to do is buy players at, high level rates in free agency, which is super costly, it's not really a structure for the long haul. Especially when you have a quarterback that no longer gets paid. If you think about a Patrick Mahomes or a Josh Allen, their roster makeup is very different as they get to their second contract, given the fact that their quarterback takes up so much of the percentage of that deal, which they deserve, but it changes how you make up your team. Yes.
First off, go Niners.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
We're a network of independent agencies, right? Similar to yourself, different teams, different companies, and you maybe do business together, but how do you work with the other organizations to drive your industry forward? Like, what do you guys work on together?
Yeah, on the NFL side, we share a ton of information, if not all information. I think the only information that doesn't necessarily get shared, like all of our player contracts are shared at the league level, so structure-wise. From an expense perspective, how you rank relative to each division in your company, whether it's sales and marketing, stadium ops, et cetera. You learn best practices from the NFL. They'll share great marketing ideas that a team might have done that you might be able to replicate. I do think the league is good that way, that it's sort of a rising tide does lift all boats in that scenario. My Elevate world is very different, right? We live in a very competitive world. And so, but my general sense is like, there's a lot to learn from everybody that's out there, and you're going to win some, you're going to lose some. I think the grace in which you lose some is equally as important as the celebration you have when you win some. And so, I think in that regard, there's probably not as much as I learned because that's given to me from those agencies. It's probably what I consume from what they do and my respect for them. But that's how we try to do it in our way. And frankly, no different than how you're doing it here. We bring in a ton of people from outside the industry that try to make, help us correlate something that might not have anything to do with us, but you might take a nugget or two that might help you in your business. But the NFL and frankly, every league in North America does share a ton of information. That does not happen in the other leagues around the globe. And I think you're seeing some struggle because of that. And so, there's a lot less parity in some of these other leagues, I think, due to that. Best practice, non-sharing. Yes?
So trades happen a lot on draft day and throughout the season. Are there certain teams that you are more open to exploring a trade deal with than others just because of a relationship you have with them or respect that you have for them?
Not necessarily. I would say there's I always think these negotiations are interesting. You often find you get to the end answer that you all knew you were going to get to. The question is how much pain had you go through to get there. So more, some teams are a little bit difficult to negotiate with. Others sort of just cut to the punchline. And it's funny in the trade world on draft day. I know you can't be in our draft room, but it can be at times terribly boring. It's like adult fantasy football until you come up for your draft pick, you're literally just sitting around watching NFL Network or ESPN, whatever network you have on, watching other teams draft. It's only interesting when it comes to you. And so that's when there's a computer system that's been developed, a mathematical equation that ranks all draft picks from a points perspective. And so, you'll get a call, and Parag Marate does, in my opinion, the best job in the NFL at this around, trying to, as you get closer to drafting your position, seeing if you want to move back, if you want to move up. Obviously, if you want to move up, you got to give more on the point scale, right? Negative from, if you want to move back, you're going to get more from it. So trying to value picks in that way is important, which in a way, we talked about culture earlier, is removing the names and faces. And it's trying to put a value to certain things to keep you sort of set and standard around not chasing something that you shouldn't otherwise chase. But yeah, we have certain, I'm sure if John Lynch were up here, he would tell you certain GMs get to the answer that we ultimately all are going to get at to faster than others, which is just painful. Yeah. And to some degree, players the same way, right? Like deadlines spur action, and deadlines in the NFL are the draft, free agency, and the start of training camp. Those are kind of like your high leverage times, which is why you see everything go down in the end. I think it's frankly stupid, equal pain on both sides, but that's just the way the world works.
Guys, we have time for one more. So, Allie, you win.
I'm Allie. I'm from Kansas City. Sorry.
That's okay. Congratulations, I assume.
I was wondering, is everyone in the NFL excited about Taylor Swift, or is it just
I think if you're not, I honestly think if you're not, you're stupid or petty or both. I think anything that's good for the league, again, back to that rising tide lifts all boats. If you believe, which is borne out by the truth of the data, that a Taylor Swift, Olivia Culpa in our world with CMC, like if you believe that that is driving fandom, then you should be a fan of it. And to me, she's awesome. Like we had the privilege of having her in our building, and this is a great story, right? I'll just end on this because kudos to her. Just talks to you about treatment of people. If you're not a fan, I'm going to make you a fan here, hopefully with this last story. Scott Swift, her father, and this is not a name drop thing. We have a relationship because Taylor got big playing I didn't see it big, but she played in a local coffee shop in Stone Harbor, New Jersey, the shore town, called Coffee Talk. And she used to stay on 103rd and Sunrise. And there is this great tavern in Stone Harbor called Fred's Tavern. I wore a Fred's Tavern t-shirt as I was getting ready to like set up for the concert. And I ran into Scott and he immediately like hugged me. So the next day we walked around. The next day he says, "Hey, show up early if you don't mind. We'll go see Taylor and everything else." So I show up and he's like, "Hey, we're not going to be able to see Taylor. She says thanks and everything else." I says, "Oh, no problem at all." And he goes, "You want to know what she's doing?" I was like, "Sure." Right? Of course you say yes. And this is all public now. She called her father the night before and said, "I want to give bonuses to every truck driver that has been with me on this tour." And she's like, "What's a life-changing amount of money?" Which that was a fun question, right? If you're her. She spent hours handwriting, signing checks to every truck driver that was on that tour. And to me, we all can't do that, but it is a good reminder for me at times to again, culture is what you celebrate and what you tolerate. There are so many little wins in the world. We can all get wrapped up in this crazy ecosystem that we live in and focus a lot on the chaos and pain. But there's a lot of good going on that you're all working on and doing. And so whenever you get a moment in whatever time frame that you get it, even the simplest notes versus a bonus check or anything else matter. And so for that, kudos to her, kudos to that team, which deserve it. And frankly, I hope we can all just learn a little bit of lesson, at least I did on that night, around embracing people who frankly are moving things in a positive direction versus tearing them down, because the world's got way too much of that. And we can use a lot more people trying to celebrate each other versus trying to tear them down. So thank you.
Thank you, Al. Leadership in the age of Al.